It was Trevor's idea. He was always the one with the crazy ideas. This time, it was celebrating Halloween in the old Bannerman house. Everyone in town knew the stories about that place. Abandoned for decades, it sat at the edge of the forest, its windows like dark eyes watching anyone who dared come close. People said it was haunted, that the Bannerman family, who lived there in the 1920s, never really left. But Trevor didn't believe in ghosts, and neither did I. At least, that's what I told myself. So when he suggested we throw a Halloween party there, it seemed like the perfect mix of thrill and stupidity that we usually went for. We were a group of 6, me, Trevor, Danny, Chloe, Sam, and Luke. We'd been friends since high school, and now, in our early 20s, we still hung out regularly, always looking for the next bit of excitement. The Bannerman house was our Everest, the ultimate test of courage. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. The night of the party, we packed the trunk of Trevor's car with drinks, snacks, and a portable speaker. Chloe had even brought a Ouija board as a joke. We arrived at the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The house loomed in front of us, its wooden boards creaking in the wind, its front door slightly ajar as if inviting us in. "Creepy as hell," Chloe muttered, hugging her arms around herself. I could tell she was trying to sound tough, but her eyes kept darting to the house like she expected something to jump out at her. "Relax," Trevor said with a grin. "It's just an old house. No such thing as ghosts." Sam and Luke exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what I believed. The house had a feeling to it, a weight in the air that pressed down on you, making it hard to breathe. But I didn't want to be the one to back out. We pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The wooden floorboards creaked under our feet, and the only light came from our flashlights, slicing through the darkness. The living room was spacious but empty, except for a few pieces of broken furniture covered in white sheets. "Let's set up here," Trevor said, dropping the bags on the floor. "This will be our base of operations." We spread out, exploring the house a bit while setting up for the party. The kitchen was a mess, with rusted pots and pans still hanging from the walls. The dining room had a long table, its surface covered in dust and dead insects. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms, each one more dilapidated than the last, with wallpaper peeling off in long strips and broken windows letting in the cold night air. As we walked through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every creak and groan of the house sounded like footsteps, and the shadows seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. We all gathered back in the living room, and Trevor cracked open a couple of beers. We tried to get into the party spirit, but the atmosphere was heavy, oppressive. Even Trevor was quieter than usual, his jokes falling flat. It was around midnight when things started getting weird. We were all sitting in a circle, telling ghost stories. How original, right? When the front door slammed shut, we all jumped, our eyes snapping to the doorway. No one was near the door, and the wind wasn't strong enough to have caused it. "Probably just the wind," Danny said, but his voice was shaky. He didn't believe it any more than the rest of us did. Then we heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs. Tap, 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 like someone knocking on a door. We all froze, our eyes wide, the color draining from Chloe's face. "Okay, who's messing around?" Trevor asked, standing up, but no one moved. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. "Maybe we should leave," Luke said, his voice barely above a whisper. Trevor laughed, but it was forced. "Come on, it's just a noise. Let's check it out." Against our better judgment, we followed him up the creaky staircase. The tapping grew louder as we reached the second floor, leading us to the last room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and the sound was definitely coming from inside. Trevor hesitated for a second before pushing the door open. The room was empty, except for an old, rotting crib in the corner. The tapping stopped as soon as we stepped inside. "See, nothing here," Trevor said, but his voice was tight. He walked over to the crib and looked inside. "It's just..." Before he could finish, the door slammed shut behind us, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. We could see our breath in the air, and a deep sense of dread settled over us. Then we heard it, a faint whispering, like a dozen voices speaking at once, but we couldn't make out the words. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, the air thickening with each passing second. "Let's get out of here," Chloe said, backing toward the door. But when she tried to open it, the door wouldn't budge. "What the hell?" Sam tried to help her, but it was like the door was glued shut. We were trapped. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the room like a thick fog. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking. Trevor was still trying to make sense of it all, but even he was starting to panic. Suddenly, the crib in the corner began to rock back and forth, slowly at first, then faster. There was no wind, no one near it. It was moving on its own. "That's it. I'm out of here," Danny said, pushing past us to the door. He threw his shoulder against it, and finally, it burst open. We all stumbled out into the hallway, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We didn't speak as we rushed down the stairs and back into the living room. The house felt alive now, like it was watching us, playing with us. Trevor was the first to break the silence. "Okay, that was weird, but it's probably just..." "Don't even say it," I snapped. "This place is haunted. Trevor, we need to leave." But as I said it, I realized something. My car keys were upstairs. In the panic, I'd left them in the room where we'd heard the tapping. And from the looks on their faces, I wasn't the only one who'd forgotten something important. "We can't just leave our stuff," Chloe said, looking pale. Trevor nodded. "We'll go together, get what we need and get out." The thought of going back upstairs made my skin crawl, but we didn't have a choice. We grabbed our flashlights and headed back up, staying close together. The house was even colder now. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like we were walking into a trap. We reached the room, and as we stepped inside, the door slammed shut again. But this time, there was no tapping, no rocking crib, just silence. I quickly grabbed my keys from the floor where I'd dropped them, and the others did the same, snatching up their phones and bags. We were about to leave when the door opened by itself. Swinging slowly inward, standing in the doorway was a man. He was tall, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes that seemed to look right through us. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of a black and white movie. We all froze, our flashlights trained on him, but he didn't move. He just stared at us, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed at the crib. "What the hell?" Luke whispered, but none of us moved. The man's hand stayed outstretched, pointing, as if urging us to look. Against every instinct, I found myself turning toward the crib. There, lying inside, was a small bundle wrapped in a dusty blanket. I stepped closer, my heart hammering in my chest. The others stayed back, watching me with wide eyes. I reached out and pulled the blanket back, revealing a tiny porcelain doll. Its face was cracked, its eyes dull and lifeless, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. I looked back at the man, but he was gone. The doorway was empty, the hall beyond it dark and silent. "We need to leave," Sam said, his voice trembling. "Now." None of us argued. We hurried out of the room, down the stairs, and into the living room. But as we reached the bottom, we heard something that made us stop in our tracks. Laughter. Low, sinister laughter, coming from all around us. It echoed through the house, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. "What the hell is going on?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the laughter. Before anyone could answer, the lights we'd set up earlier flickered, and then went out, plunging us into darkness. The laughter grew louder, and I could feel something cold brushing against my arm, like icy fingers trailing across my skin. Panic set in as we realized there was no way out. Our flashlights flickered, barely cutting through the thick darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The laughter had turned sinister, echoing through the walls, growing louder, more menacing. It was as if the house was mocking us, feeding off our fear. "We need to get out now," Trevor shouted, his voice trembling. He grabbed the doorknob and twisted, but the door wouldn't budge. It was like the house had sealed us in. "Try the windows," Luke yelled, running over to one and trying to pry it open. But they were stuck fast, as if they hadn't been opened in decades. The glass was dirty, fogged over, and our attempts to break it were met with failure. It was like the house was alive, determined to keep us trapped. "What the hell is going on?" Chloe cried, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't real. It can't be real." "It's real," I said, my voice shaky. "It's too real." The room was suffocating, the air thick and cold. It felt like the walls were closing in, the space shrinking around us. And then the laughter stopped, plunging the house into an eerie silence. The sudden quiet was almost worse than the noise, a vacuum of sound that left us all frozen in place. Then, slowly, the temperature dropped even further, our breath misting in the air. A dense fog began to creep along the floor, swirling around our feet. It moved with purpose, filling the room, rising higher and higher until it was up to our waists, then our chests. We could barely see each other, the fog so thick it obscured everything. And then we saw them, figures emerging from the fog, shadowy and indistinct at first, but growing more solid as they approached. There were 5 of them, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, like the man we had seen earlier. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and they moved with a strange, jerky motion, like puppets on strings. They circled us, their eyes staring straight ahead, their faces expressionless. We huddled together, backs pressed against each other, trying to stay calm, but the fear was overwhelming. The fog wrapped around us, cold and damp, making it hard to breathe. "What do you want?" Luke shouted, his voice cracking with fear. One of the figures stepped forward. It was a woman, her long, dark hair hanging loose around her face. She looked at us with empty eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was a hollow whisper that sent chills down my spine. "You don't belong here," she said. "This is our home. You need to leave." "We're sorry," Trevor stammered. "We didn't mean to disturb you. We'll go. Just let us go." The woman's eyes locked onto Trevor's, her gaze cold and unfeeling. "There's only one way out," she said slowly. "One of you must stay." "What does that mean?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "Stay where? You must choose," the woman said. "One of you must stay here, with us. The rest can leave." We all looked at each other, horrified. The idea of leaving someone behind was unthinkable, but the figures were closing in, their eyes fixed on us, their hands reaching out. There was no time to think, no time to plan. We had to choose. "Wait," Sam yelled, stepping forward. "This isn't fair. We didn't do anything wrong." But the woman shook her head, her expression unchanged. "You entered our home," she said. "You disturbed us. Now you must pay the price." We were trapped. There was no way out, no escape. The only option was to do as they said. The figures were almost upon us now, their cold hands brushing against our skin, sending shivers through us. We could feel their presence, heavy and oppressive, pushing us toward a decision. "I'll stay," I blurted out, the words leaving my mouth before I could think them through. "Just let the others go." The figures paused, their eyes turning to me. The woman's gaze softened, just a fraction, and she nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "The others may go." "No," Chloe cried, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this." But I knew there was no other way. The fear in their eyes, the desperation, It was too much. I couldn't let them suffer any longer. I had to be the one to stay. The fog began to lift, the figures stepping back to make room. The front door, which had been locked tight, creaked open, revealing the dark night outside. The others hesitated, looking back at me, but I forced a smile. "Go," I said, my voice steady. "It's okay. Just go." They didn't need any more convincing. One by one, they walked through the door, disappearing into the night, the fog swallowing them up. I watched them go, my heart heavy, but there was no turning back now. The door slammed shut behind them, and I was alone. The figures closed in around me, their eyes dark and empty, their hands reaching out. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, the air growing heavy around me. "You belong to us now," the woman whispered, her breath cold against my skin. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was the sound of laughter, low and mocking, echoing through the house. The Bannerman house had claimed another victim, and this time there was no escape.